The global chessboard, it's just constantly shifting, isn't it? Alliances change, power dynamics emerge.
Oh, constantly.
And in this kind of fluid environment, really understanding the strategic thinking of major players like China becomes, well, absolutely essential.
It really does. Yeah, especially today with these huge global shifts happening so fast. You need that perspective on how influential nations are approaching foreign policy.
Yeah.
It tells you a lot about where things might be heading.
Exactly. And that's precisely where we're going today in this deep dive. We're going to unpack China's distinct approach to what they call major country diplomacy in the new era. And our insights, they're coming from a recent discussion with two really prominent Chinese scholars, Professor Zhang Weiwei from Fudan University.
Dean of the China Institute there.
And Professor Jin Kenrong from Renmin University.
Associate Dean at the School of International Relations. Yeah, these are definitely two very influential voices in China, academically and, probably in policy circles too. So it's a valuable perspective.
Absolutely. So your mission today really is to come away with the core principles, the characteristics, and the strategies of Chinese foreign policy. Think of it as your kind of streamlined guide to its global implications. We're trying to cut through the noise a bit.
Yeah, our goal is basically to synthesize what they discussed, highlight the key ideas behind China's diplomatic philosophy, and, how those ideas are actually being used out there in the world today.
Okay, so let's start with some history, some context. Professor Zhang brought up a really key moment back in 1987, Deng Xiaoping meeting Tanzanian President Nyerere. Why was that conversation so significant?
Well, what's interesting is even back then, Deng apparently nailed what he saw as the two huge global challenges. War and peace, obviously, but also the North-South divide, the gap between developed and developing nations.
That early on.
Yeah. His focus on those two pillars was, pretty prescient. It really set the stage for a lot of China's long-term foreign policy thinking.
And Deng didn't just point out the problems, did he? He had ideas about solutions, especially for that wealth gap.
He did. He really stressed South-South cooperation, developing countries working together, supporting each other, and also North-South dialogue. Proper engagement between the richer and poorer nations. He saw it as essential for global progress.
He argued that developed nations couldn't really succeed long-term if poverty was so widespread elsewhere, right?
Exactly. He framed it almost as interconnectedness, mutual self-interest, not just charity, long-term stability for everyone.
It's an interesting angle. Professor Zhang then drew a contrast between that view and a perceived Western approach.
Yes, he talked about the Western zero-sum game idea, the notion that if one country wins, another has to lose. He positioned the Chinese approach as fundamentally different, emphasizing mutual benefit, rejecting that winner-takes-all thinking.
Which logically flows into that concept China always talks about, the community of shared future for mankind. Can you break that down a bit? What does it actually mean in practice?
Well, at its core, it's this idea that all nations are fundamentally linked. We share a common destiny. So it pushes for a global order built on mutual respect, win-win cooperation, where everyone can benefit and, tackling global challenges together.
So a different model.
Yeah, essentially China's proposing a shift away from what they might see as a Western-led competitive system towards one that stresses interdependence, collective problem solving. It's a direct challenge, really, to the current global setup.
Right.
Rejects unilateralism, calls for shared prosperity.
Okay, so that's the philosophical base. Now, let's jump forward to this new era of Chinese diplomacy, especially after the 18th Party Congress. What were the really big shifts?
Well, probably the biggest was a change in the guiding principle. The old idea of Tao Guang Yang Wei, keeping a low profile, biding time.
Right.
That seemed to gradually shift towards Fenfei Yue, which means something like striving for achievement or making a bigger contribution.
So less passive, more active?
Exactly. It wasn't just words. It signaled a real shift from mostly watching the world stage to wanting to actively shape it, a major turning point.
Moving from building strength quietly to actively engaging, Professor Jin also mentioned a change in China's self-image.
Precisely. China started seeing itself less as just a big regional power in East Asia and more as a genuine major world power. And that shift, naturally, meant they needed a new approach, what they called major country diplomacy with Chinese characteristics.
Tailored to its global role, reflecting its own history and culture.
Right. And the 18th Party Congress, that was kind of the marker for this shift, coinciding with Xi Jinping's leadership taking hold.
And this wasn't just talk, right? It showed up in their diplomatic style, too.
Absolutely. The style change. It went from being quite reactive, often defensive, responding to criticism, to being much more proactive, directly stating China's views, even criticizing others when they felt it was warranted. Professor Jin mentioned people like Zhao Lijian as examples of this more assertive style.
Yeah, those remarks definitely got noticed globally. And alongside the style change, there were new concepts, new philosophies driving things, beyond the community of shared future.
Definitely. Concepts like new type international relations based on cooperation, mutual benefit, also pushing hard for an open and inclusive world economy, and really emphasizing building global partnerships on many different levels.
So a focus on multilateralism, rejecting Cold War thinking.
That's the message, yes. A clear rejection of bloc confrontation.
And Professor Jin highlighted one particular initiative that really embodies this proactive stance.
Oh, yes, the Belt and Road Initiative, the BRI. He identified that as China's first really massive proactive effort to shape the world outside its borders.
A big change from the previous century.
Huge change. For 100 years before that, China was mainly focused on survival, internal stability, dealing with immense challenges. The BRI signaled they now had the capacity and the will to project influence and build connections globally. A massive infrastructure and investment project.
Okay, so moving beyond those big shifts, the discussion also touched on how China's diplomatic focus areas are evolving. Seems like the list of priorities got longer.
That's right. It's not just the traditional stuff anymore. Relations with other big powers, neighbors, developing countries, multilateral groups.
Right.
They've added new priorities, like actively protecting China's overseas interests, which makes sense, right? Way more Chinese citizens traveling and living abroad. Huge overseas investments now.
Logical consequence of a bigger global footprint. What else is new on the priority list?
Well, telling China's story effectively, countering negative narratives, engaging more with international media, public opinion, that's become crucial for them.
Shaping the narrative.
Exactly. Also, actively participating in shaping global governance, not just being a member, but playing a more influential role. And as we said, the BRI itself is now a massive, distinct focus area.
So a much broader, more outward-looking agenda. Let's dig into that global governance piece. What's China's vision there? What makes it distinct?
Okay, key things. They strongly back multilateralism, but specifically with the UN at the core. They often contrast this with what they see as a more U.S.-centric approach. They also stress development alongside security. The argument is you can't have lasting peace without economic progress, shared prosperity. That's maybe a subtle difference from a Western focus that often puts security first.
Ties back to Deng's point about the North-South gap, maybe.
I think so, yeah. Development as a foundation for peace.
And the idea of equality between nations.
Absolutely. Big emphasis on equality regardless of size or power.
Yeah.
They explicitly reject a hierarchical world order. And finally, a real cornerstone. Jackie Bugansha-Neijing.
Non-interference in internal affairs.
Firmly sticking to that principle. That's rooted in their own history, and it's a major point of difference compared to, well, interventionist tendencies seen elsewhere sometimes.
Okay, now we can't talk about China's diplomacy today without getting into the U.S. relationship. The scholars acknowledged it's deteriorated. What reasons did they give?
Well, the main reason cited was China's rise economically, politically, and the U.S. seemingly struggling to see that as an opportunity for cooperation rather than just a strategic challenge.
So U.S. perception is key.
That's how they presented it. They also pointed to China's own long-term planning, like the stuff laid out at the 19th Fourth Plenary Session, the big plans.
The 5-year plan, the 2035 goals, military modernization targets.
Right. That coordinated planning showing China's own trajectory.
And this tougher international climate has led to adjustments in China's own development strategy, right?
A good time. The main strategy used to be the great international circulation, heavily reliant on global trade, foreign markets. Now it's shifted to dual circulation.
Dual circulation.
Yeah. The idea is to make the internal domestic economy the main engine, internal circulation as the mainstay, but still connect strategically with the outside world, external circulation, so they reinforce each other.
Why the shift?
Mostly driven by those strained international relations, but also by the fact that China's domestic market is now enormous. Professor Jin mentioned its retail market actually overtook the U.S. in Q4 of the year before they spoke.
Wow, so building domestic resilience while still engaging globally.
Pretty much a buffer against external shocks.
And this seems linked to a change in tech development, too.
Absolutely. Trade friction really highlighted vulnerabilities, didn't it? Difficulty getting certain key technologies. So there's been a big strategic push away from just relying on inputs towards much more emphasis on independent innovation. technological self-reliance.
And finally, how has China's approach to opening up changed?
It's evolving to what they call high-level opening up, meaning it's more selective, more strategic. They're welcoming foreign investment, but particularly in advanced sectors, green technologies, things that fit their development goals.
So not just any investment.
Right. And promoting new trade deals like RCEP, that big Asia-Pacific agreement. It's a more targeted way of engaging economically.
Okay, so pulling this together, we're seeing clear differences between Chinese diplomacy and maybe more traditional Western approaches. What did the scholars highlight as the core differences in goals, methods, philosophies?
Professor Jin summed it up quite neatly. In terms of goals, he suggested China's main focus is on self-improvement, constantly trying to do better than its own past, whereas the West is perhaps more focused on maintaining its current dominant position.
Interesting contrast. And methods.
China, he said, emphasizes learning from others and seeking win-win outcomes. He contrasted this with what he described as Western tendencies towards suppression rather than fair competition.
And the underlying philosophies.
The big one is China's emphasis on inclusiveness, common development for everyone, that community or shared future idea again, versus what's sometimes seen as a more exclusive Western approach. Professor Jin used that analogy.
The fishing analogy.
Yeah, instead of just giving fish, teach people how to fish, underscoring that focus on sustainable progress, building capacity together.
That makes the difference pretty clear. Now, the discussion also got into recent events. Let's start with that U.S.-China meeting in Alaska. What were the takeaways there?
Alaska was framed as really pivotal, mostly because Yang Jiechi and Wang Yi were so direct, so public with their statements right there in front of the cameras.
Yeah, that was quite something.
It got huge global attention, even some positive comments, apparently, in parts of the Western press, surprisingly. The core message seemed to be telling the U.S., look, focus on your own problems at home instead of just external competition with us.
Definitely a shift in tone from past encounters. What do you think the goal was there? A different audience, perhaps?
Hard to say definitively, but it's certainly projected confidence, maybe aimed as much at a domestic audience or other countries as at the U.S. delegation. It marks a clear departure from more guarded exchanges.
Okay, moving to another hot topic. The Quad U.S., Japan, India, Australia, and Taiwan. How did they view those?
Well, regarding the Quad, they addressed the Asian mini-NATO concerns, but played down the unity aspect, pointed out the different interests among those four countries.
And the trade links with China?
Exactly. Makes a unified anti-China strategy tricky. On Taiwan, they noted what they called continued U.S. mistakes, suggesting these might actually create openings for China to resolve the issue more decisively down the line.
And the PLA flights?
Yeah, sending aircraft near Taiwan when U.S. delegations visited was mentioned as a clear signal of China's unwavering position on the issue. No ambiguity there.
Right. Switching gears again, that big 25-year deal between China and Iran. What's the significance of that partnership?
That was highlighted as really significant. Shows China acting more assertively on its own interests, less worried about U.S. reactions.
That might be in the deal.
Things like major infrastructure cooperation were mentioned. Also potentially using the RMB, maybe digital currency, for trade between them. That could challenge the U.S. dollar's dominance, at least regionally.
Strategically.
Well, there's the potential for a direct land route for China to the Middle East via Iran. That would be a huge strategic gain, really boosting its position.
Definitely sounds like a move with major ripple effects. Okay, lastly, Myanmar. The instability there and the impact on the Belt and Road, how does that fit in?
Yeah, the instability in Myanmar was acknowledged as a real problem for BRI projects there. Especially difficult given China's strict non-interference policy, right? They can't just wade in.
Tricky balancing act.
Very. They also talked about the U.S. and others trying to launch their own BRI alternatives. China's official line is, fine, competition is good if it actually helps developing countries.
But they sounded skeptical.
A bit, yeah. Some suggestion that maybe the U.S. goal is more about disrupting China's BRI than offering a real alternative based on past experiences with U.S. aid programs. But despite challenges like Myanmar, they strongly reaffirmed the overall success and strategic value of the BRI, including its expansion into digital infrastructure now, too.
So, navigating this complex world, what's the final takeaway on China's strategy and mindset? What's most important for them?
The key message seemed to be, stay focused strategically. Don't get distracted by short-term international games. And crucially, keep sorting out domestic issues. A strong home base is the foundation for strong foreign policy.
So, internal strength first.
Right, and internationally. A balanced approach. Seek friendship and cooperation where possible, but be ready for competition, even struggle, when core interests are challenged.
Well, it's definitely clear China's diplomacy is incredibly complex, always evolving, and has been absolutely central to its development. It keeps shaping big moments on the world stage. Hopefully, this deep dive has given you, our listener, a clearer window into the principles and features of this new era diplomacy. It really does highlight their system's confidence.
Indeed. Understanding China's foreign policy means looking at its history, its shifting priorities, its unique philosophy. It's a complicated picture, no doubt, but pretty essential for making sense of our interconnected world today.
So, thinking about everything we've discussed, China's diplomacy, its evolving global role, what single guiding principle do you think will be the most crucial for shaping its international actions going forward? Definitely something to reflect on.
It certainly is. And if you want to explore this further, do check out our official channels on various platforms. We have more in-depth content and discussions there.
Absolutely. A huge thank you to our expert guest today for shedding light on this vital topic. And of course, thank you, our listener, for joining us. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.